Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. Today, my name is AJay Raj, back with another anatomy and physiology video for you all. Today's lesson topic is all about the diseases of the integumentary system, part 2. I had previously made a part 1 video of this sequel. This is basically the sequel of that previous video, part 1 of diseases of the integumentary system. It does not necessarily need to follow in order topic-wise, but it does follow in order concept-wise. Meaning that some of the concepts you might need some backstory that I'm going to refer to here, and I would highly suggest that you go watch that previous one, part 1, if you haven't already before watching this one. There's a reason why I put them in such an order. It's all going in chronological flow with the content, so you guys will be completely caught up if you refer back to that video. So before we jump into the meat of today's lesson, please make sure to smash that subscribe button down below, hit that like button on this video, as well as hitting that post notification bell to get notified on any of our channel's latest posts at eCoreAcademy. All of those things are very greatly appreciated. Now, today's lesson's topic, the theme of today's topic is going to be the same as our previous video. We're just going to be reinventing, and we're going to be building off of what we had already pre-existingly set as our expectation and what this whole precedent of this lesson would be. So the theme is going to be what we're going to be discovering today. What are the various different diseases of the integumentary system, and what are their effects on the body? So let's jump right into it. And just to give a little insight on this, we're just going to be going through multiple diseases and disorders of the integumentary system. And then, of course, the anatomy and physiology role of that is going to be identifying what exactly their effects are on the body. And we'll make a next video sequel to this. In response to all of these disorders, we're going to actually make another video. I'm going to make another video on the treatments and curing plans for all of these diseases and disorders. Because as a doctor, that's what you're really all about. You're trying to cure someone. You're trying to help someone after diagnosing. So diagnostics and then remedy are both important parts of the whole system. So let's jump right into it. So first, we're going to look at psoriasis. Psoriasis is one of the #1 integumentary diseases. It has the most types, and almost every type of integumentary disease is going to either originate from psoriasis or is going to be classified under a type of psoriasis. So psoriasis is the dominant disorder and disease in the integumentary system, and it branches out into all other types. So let's look at psoriasis and the different types of psoriasis. So the first type of psoriasis that we're going to look into today in this specific video is the guttate psoriasis. However, in my previous video, part 1 of this diseases of the integumentary system, I did refer to plaque psoriasis and psoriasis as a whole. So those are the two main ones, and plaque psoriasis is the most common. But the first one that we're going to refer to today in this video, part 2, is going to be guttate psoriasis, a specific type of psoriasis. And guttate psoriasis states that rather than large scales, when compared to plaque psoriasis, guttate psoriasis manifests as tiny lesions or teardrops on the skin. So what that's basically saying is it's showing the shape and the characteristics of the affected skin on you when it's affected and infected with guttate psoriasis. So what it's saying is it manifests as tiny lesions, meaning small teardrop, bump-shaped areas. It's not necessarily going to be a bump where it rivets out of the skin, but it actually takes away from the exterior skin and forms little teardrops. And it's also saying manifest lesions, meaning that it's not going to have such a absolute and concrete, definition between the clear skin, what's not affected, and between the affected skin. Unlike plaque psoriasis, where there's an immediate drastic change between the uninflamed skin between the affected skin. There's a very serious divoting from the edges of that affected skin. However, with guttate psoriasis, it's much less formal, meaning it's going to be a gradual shift from redness and swelling all the way to the heavily affected area. So it's all going to cave into the center, and it's going to slowly digress, and it's much more easily seen. However, they are much smaller than they are appearing in plaque psoriasis, and they're much more difficult to identify. And they mainly appear on the abdomen, which is basically the stomach area where the abs are, the upper extremities, which are basically the fingers, and they do not appear on the palms or soles, which are basically, your feet and your hands, your palms, and that's where the thick skin is located, like other forms of the disorder. And the main form that affects the soles and the palms as well is plaque psoriasis, the #1 leading case of psoriasis. So let's look at a diagram here. And before we get into this diagram, I just want to be a bit apprehensive and express a bit of caution to you. Before we look at any of these images, they can be rather a bit gruesome. Not necessarily gruesome, but a little bit graphic, that to the point where you might get queasy if you are very sensitive to such items. But I felt that it was important to show these. So if you are very sensitive to certain graphics, because it is abrasions on the skin, it's not something pleasant to look at, but it's important that we identify that. So I'll be giving you a warning if you want to skip over that, and like I will now. So 3, 2, 1. I'll switch to the picture now. So this is just guttate psoriasis. It's not that bad. There's tiny lesions like teardrops, as I showed you, and you can see the redness is definitely there. It's almost as large as the central system there. But if you look at this here, if we're going to use this example here, you can see this redness outside. I'm going to draw a little circle around it. It looks like kind of like a teardrop in that circular ocular shape wise. And then if I draw this scribble out here, you can see that this is all the clear and unaffected skin. And it basically slowly transitions from that into there. And finally, you can see here in the center here, that's a very heavily affected, and it's very obvious. And it's much easier to identify plaque psoriasis than it is guttate psoriasis, merely because of the size, but they share very similar properties. So let's move on to our next slide, and I'm going to clarify further steps and further identifications of guttate psoriasis. Psoriasis part 2, let's look at types of psoriasis continued. Our next type is, we're going to be continuing off of guttate psoriasis. Sorry about that. So let's continue to look at guttate psoriasis. So this form of psoriasis, guttate psoriasis, is most common in young adults or children, and less than a third of psoriasis patients has it. So what it's basically saying is less than 1/3 of people with psoriasis do not have the specific type, being guttate psoriasis. And it's most commonly found in young adults and children, so not necessarily, above 18 years old. No one really, it's not very common in that age group. So dry air is a catalyst in flare-ups, meaning it causes this. It does not have a direct effect on it, but it actually causes this through your immunizing effect. So a lot of dry air can actually cause guttate psoriasis to inflame in the certain affected skin, and especially in winter, because in winter, if you're not in America, you might not be experiencing some winter. If you're in places like India, you might not really know what winter is like. But in winter, unlike summer or spring and fall, it's not as moist. The air isn't very moist. So the air actually tends to dry out when it gets a lot colder and it starts to snow. All the moisture gets sucked out, and it's very dry and harsh on the skin in general. And severity of it is determined by the amount of coverage, meaning it's not the depth of the actual wound itself, but it's about how much skin it actually affects, so the amount of affected skin. And warning, I'm going to be switching to another picture now. So this is, it's a large amount of coverage of the skin here, so this is much more larger severity of it. Guttate psoriasis is not necessarily that severe, and it's not necessarily going to take up a large amount of affected skin unless you have a severe case of it, which is also going to be more rare in general. So psoriasis part 3, this is going to be a continued of our types of psoriasis, and this is inverse psoriasis, our next type of psoriasis. And it's also known as flexural or intertriginous psoriasis. Inverse psoriasis manifests on flexor surfaces or in skin folds. So what that's basically saying is it's a type of psoriasis that targets motion balance within bone rubbing against skin. So a lot of those places include, the elbows or the interior of those joints. So like your interior of your elbow here. So I'm trying to get this in the shot. So if you look like the inside of your elbow right here, this is where it gets inflamed. The knees, it can also be found in various different regions, which I'll show you later. But those are like the flexor surfaces where the skin actually folds across and doesn't actually get rotated outwards. So it's the opposite of where your joints are, and basically known as your skin folds. And sorry, I'm just going to give you a warning. I'm about to switch to the picture now. So as you can see here, this is the knee, and that's where it's actually found. And this is one of the most painful types of psoriasis. It's not necessarily the most damaging, but it can be very, very, very painful here because you have a lot of friction in your skin fold, so it can become extremely painful. And this isn't from personal experience or anything. This is from my own research. Psoriasis part 4, we're going to be just building off of what inverse psoriasis is. So this is still on inverse psoriasis. And common sites of inverse psoriasis, like I said, include the navel, groin folds where the genitalia are, the lips, so underneath the lips where that skin fold is here, the ears, where the ear is actually covered off behind it, the chafe there, the axillae, which is the armpit region, and under the breast as well. So because there's also a skin fold there, and not everyone necessarily has that issue, it's also a very inflammatory access for this very type of disease, and it can have inflammatory folds, which actually affect around the nipple area. And it can also be included between the buttocks, which are basically, your butt. And it's included in between the butt, and it's called the intergluteal cleft. So it's basically the interior of your butt. These are all the different types of skin folds. I know you guys might be thinking, wow, that's really funny. Why are you including that? Well, as a doctor, you're going to be exposed to all of these different occasions, and you have to be up for it in all seriousness. So these are very serious topics, and this does really happen. And because these red patches occur in sensitive areas, patients may experience bleeding, pain, or irritation. Like I said, these skin folds are not only a lot of friction, but they're also extremely sensitive because they're not shown on the exterior of the body. They're not necessarily shown on the exterior of the body when a joint bends. So you might have a lot of bleeding, a lot of pain, and irritation at these sites. And even if you don't have this certain disease here, if you have dry skin at, say for example, your knee or your elbow, and you start to have sweat trickling down your limbs, and it starts to get chafed up in that area, it can actually have some serious irritation, more burning than irritation actually. And this is just an example of another example of psoriasis with the skin. All right, psoriasis part 5. Next type of psoriasis we have is pustular psoriasis. So pustular psoriasis, as the name suggests, raised bumps filled with pus. So basically, it's pus-filled bumps that are in the exterior of the skin, and they accompany the telltale psoriatic scales. So this form of psoriasis is uncommon and can have acute flare-ups, meaning that it is not necessarily going to be consistent flare-ups, only depending on certain situations and certain environments, and it can be associated with fever or manifest chronically. So that's manifest chronically means any chronic issues interior to the skin, and it can be of any issue that's exterior to the integumentary system. So it can be something completely different that can actually cause pustular psoriasis, and we're not necessarily going to cover that here, but maybe we will be getting into that in a later lesson. Warning, I'm going to be switching to this. This is a bit more gruesome just to look at, so that's why I wanted to give you a little bit of warning. So there it is. It forms little bumps here, and that's the heel of the foot. And yeah, as you can see, it's a much different coloration. It's kind of like the guttate psoriasis, except that the coloration is much more solid and looks less chafed up. So we're going to be continuing on the types of psoriasis. We're going to be moving on to our next type of psoriasis, which is erythrodermic psoriasis, and it is described as aggressive and is considered the most severe form of psoriasis. So this is on the upper scale of psoriasis and pain level, and as aggressiveness and most severe form. And it involves a full body rash that can spread quickly from the initial site of inflammation. So this is extremely dangerous and can be extremely painful because after it has an origination spot, it has to be cured immediately. Otherwise, it will start to spread across the body, meaning affected skin will not be the only immediately affected skin will not be the only affected skin throughout the body. And the rash peels and itches or burns intensely. So the rash peels, they itch and they burn very intensely all throughout the affected skin. So I'm going to show a picture. This is a bit gruesome as well. I mean, nothing is really, that bad, not too gruesome, but it's just a bit more graphics. But it's important that we actually look at this because it's easier to identify. So I'll be switching in 3, 2, 1 to the picture. So this is a picture, again, not that gruesome, but the only bad part about this is that it actually spreads very often. It's not necessarily going to have too much of pain if it's at a located spot and where the contact is made originally. However, it can spread very easily, and that's where you get the inflicted damage. Now let's move on to skin cancers now. This is our next section here, all about skin cancers. So now that we've moved from, different type of disorders of the skin, we're going to look at diseases of the skin. And as you can tell, cancer is never a fun thing to know, to look upon. And most types of cancers cancer itself does not have its own proper cure and defined treatment. So that's why it's a very risky and unstable thing. So let's look at types of carcinoma. And carcinoma basically is just another way of saying skin cancer. So we have basal cell carcinoma, our first type of carcinoma, and basal cell carcinoma is the most common type of skin cancer. And just to give you a bit of a background check with skin cancers, skin cancer is actually the #1 most common form of cancer in the United States, and that's specifically to the United States. And the reason being is it does not necessarily have, well, it has many different levels of severity. It can be very easily, taken in. And yeah, it's very undefined. You don't necessarily have a given cure for skin cancers. It can be very, very light and can be naturally recovered from without much assistance needed. And it can also be very devastating to the point where you're basically on the brink of death, and your skin is extremely sensitive. Your integument is basically waiting to collapse at that point. And it is curable if found early, especially because it rarely metastasizes. Notice how I said cancer in general does not have definite cures. There are many other substitutes for cures that does not necessarily work for everyone, but it does work for specific people. And it rarely metastasizes, meaning that if you think about metabolics, it does not spread very often. However, it does spread, meaning on the exterior of the body, but it does spread to organs. So it works its way from the outside to the interior of the body. And BCCs, which are basal cell carcinomas, these are the cells. They look like smooth, pearly bumps, which are mostly found on the face, neck, and back. So I'm going to be switching to the picture in 3, 2, 1. So this is the picture, very simple. Not much on the exterior actually happening here, but it's a lot more on the interior. It's basically, it's a giant war happening. And skin cancer is something that's not meant to be joked around with. So let's move on to our second type of carcinoma or skin cancer, and we have squamous cell carcinoma. So we had basal cell carcinoma, and this is squamous cell carcinoma. And the difference between these two is they attack different kinds of cells. So the basal cell attacks the basals, and squamous attacks squamous cells. So squamous cell carcinoma occurs on parts exposed to the sun. So basically, it's what happens in response to UV exposure, which is ultraviolet radiation, which is radiation emitted from the sun that is actually very harmful. So SCC, or squamous cell carcinoma, often develops on areas with actinic keratosis, keratin being what actually develops the skin protection on the exterior. So it's basically damage to the keratin layers, and which are crusty red sores caused by UV exposure, which is ultraviolet radiation. And SCC looks like firm red bumps susceptible to bleeding and crusting when made with exterior contact or involuntary contact. And yeah, like I was saying, ultraviolet radiation, the ozone layer in the earth actually protects us from these harmful rays, but sometimes our ozone layer is very breached and we might get a minimal amount of ultraviolet radiation, and that's how it actually occurs. So ultraviolet radiation in general, very, very harmful, and you should be very careful with that. So try and cover up your skin in very, very hot and sunny days, and also depending on what area you are in. So I'm going to be switching to the picture in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So this is a picture, very simple. This is obviously, as you can see, on the sternum, right below the neck here. So this is the neck area, but it can also be found in, it's most commonly found on the neck, on the back, and other parts as such, just like basal cell carcinoma. It attacks the very similar parts. And finally, for our final disorder, we have melanoma. So what is melanoma? Melanoma is deadly if not found early because it metastasizes quickly, and melanoma is basically another specific type of skin cancer, but I've decided to keep it separate because it targets a specific focal point, which I will get into when we're talking about the cures for all of these types of diseases. So it is most common in the southern hemisphere, so that's below the equator, the southern part below the equator, where the ozone layer is thin, so much, much thinner in the southern half. So if you're in India or South America, that area there are the lower parts of Asia, and even in Africa, that's where it's much more targeted. And you can think about that. It's much sunnier in those areas, much more consistently sunny. So you're going to have much more contact with UV radiation, and it has to do with UV radiation as well. And melanoma looks like irregular dark spots with different appearances than a patient's moles. So like moles on the skin, melanoma is very dark. Abrasions on the skin, it's much different in contrast to the other healthy skin. The affected skin is often looks like birthmarks, and that's how melanoma often gets confused, because people might think it's birthmarks, or it might be just skin coloration that you've been given an earlier time that you were unaware of, but you must get that checked out. That's why birthmarks like mine are here. I have this birthmark on my left hand. I don't know if you can see it right here. We had to get this checked out by my dermatologist. As soon as we started to actually see it get really big with my skin, but they told me that it's actually not growing with my skin, that it's not actually growing on my skin, but it's growing with my skin, and it's not a case of melanoma. It's just simply a birthmark. So that's what you have to get clarified as well. So I'm going to be switching to our final picture in 3, 2, 1. So this is what melanoma actually looks like, and melanoma is just a dark spot. Not much happening on the exterior like most skin cancers, but everything is really happening on the interior. And if you're looking at it at a cellular level on the affected spot, it's basically just a war and devastation if it's not treated properly and if it's not treated immediately. Alright guys, so that'll be it for today's video. This has been the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform today. Please make sure to like and subscribe down below. Hit that post notification bell. And yeah, all of that's very greatly appreciated. Once again, thank you guys for the 1,000 subscribers. Let's keep this growing, and let's try and hit 2,000 really quickly. We're already on pace for that, on track for that, to do that within a month. Please visit our website at www.ecoreacademy.org to get full unlocked access to all of our videos, organized into course studies with all of our access to excess information that we have there, as well as our specific events that are all that give each and every video their own integrated worksheet, note sheets, and quizzes that go along with all of our course study videos, so that you get full unlocked access to what eCoreAcademy offers to you. And all you need to do is make an account for free. Once you've registered, you get all of the little perks that we offer there on top of everything else. Feel free to email us at eCoreAcademy@gmail.com if you have any questions or if you just want to reach out. Also, visit all of our socials down in the description box below. We have all of our links down there, and we have our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Try to check us a follow at all of our social media platforms. See what kind of interesting content we have there aside from what we're posting on our YouTube channel and our website. And yeah, you can use them as mediums to share all of our videos as well. So once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed. And this has been AJ, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace. Take it easy.